Before America watched Jessica Tarlov storm off the Five in stunned silence, she thought she could corner Clint Eastwood about his violent, outdated films on live television. This is the story of how one surprise guest appearance turned into the most explosive TV moment of 2024, and why what happened after the cameras stopped rolling was even more powerful than what aired. Your films glorify violence and toxic masculinity. Jessica Tarlov's accusation cut through the Fox News studio like a blade as she stared directly at Clint Eastwood. What had started as a surprise guest appearance was about to become the most uncomfortable television moment in recent memory, and Clint hadn't even raised his voice yet. The Fox News studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy on that Tuesday afternoon in March 2024. The Five's producers had teased a surprise guest all day, but nobody, not the panel, not the crew, not even the network executives, expected to see Clint Eastwood walk through those doors. At 94 years old, the legendary director moved with deliberate purpose across the studio floor, wearing a simple navy jacket and that expression of quiet authority that had defined his screen presence for over 6 decades. The audience erupted in spontaneous applause, but Clint just gave his characteristic subtle nod, taking his seat with the same understated confidence that had made him a cultural icon. Greg Gutfeld, never one to miss an opportunity for humor, cracked a half-joke about Dirty Harry entering the studio armed with opinions instead of a .44 Magnum. The panel laughed, the tension momentarily broken. But something in the air felt different. This wasn't going to be another softball celebrity interview. Jessica Tarlov sat across from Clint, her arms folded, her expression unreadable. As the Five's liberal voice, she had built her reputation on challenging conservative viewpoints with sharp intelligence and unwavering conviction. She had come prepared for battle, armed with talking points about Hollywood's responsibility in shaping American culture. The other panelists, Donna Perino, Jesse Waters, and Judge Jeanine Pirro, sensed the brewing tension. They had all worked with Jessica long enough to recognize the signs when she was preparing to make a point that would dominate headlines. But they had also underestimated what it meant to have a living legend sitting at their table. Jesse Waters leaned forward with his trademark grin, attempting to ease into the conversation. "Clint," he said, "you've got half the country cheering you and the other half clutching their pearls. What brings you to the Five?" Clint's response was typically economical. "Just thought it might be time to have a real conversation about what stories mean and who gets to tell them." 10 words that somehow carried the weight of a 6-decade career in entertainment. The simplicity of his answer was deceptive. In those 10 words, Clint had established the terms of engagement. This wouldn't be about box office numbers or Hollywood gossip. This would be about something deeper, the role of storytelling in American culture and the responsibility that comes with having a platform. All eyes turned to Jessica, and everyone in the studio understood that the real conversation was about to begin. Jessica Tarlov didn't wait for a formal invitation to engage. She straightened her notes with deliberate precision, her voice carrying the sharp clarity that had made her one of television's most formidable political commentators. "I'll be honest," she began, her tone professional but pointed. "Your films may be iconic, but they've also romanticized violence, vigilante justice, and frankly, an outdated form of masculinity that doesn't fit the world we live in today." The accusation hit the studio like a thunderclap. A murmur ran through the audience as cameras captured the moment when respectful celebrity interview transformed into something far more confrontational. This was exactly the kind of cultural criticism that made headlines and drove social media engagement. Clint looked at her with the same steady gaze he had given countless screen opponents, but without hostility or surprise, just focused attention. He leaned back slightly, folded his hands, and repeated her phrase slowly, as if tasting the words, outdated masculinity, or maybe just complicated men trying to figure things out in a complicated world. The response was classic Clint Eastwood, taking his opponent's argument and reframing it with quiet precision. Greg Gutfeld raised an eyebrow, Dana Perino bit her lip, and even Jesse seemed uncertain where this exchange was heading. But Jessica wasn't backing down. She had come prepared for this fight, and Clint's calm deflection only seemed to energize her attack. That's just it, she continued, her voice gaining intensity. Complicated men who always seem to carry guns, who always end up being the necessary force when institutions fail. Don't you think that glorifies something dangerous? The question hung in the air, challenging not just Clint's artistic choices, but the entire mythology of American heroism that his characters had come to represent. She wasn't just criticizing movies, she was questioning the cultural values they promoted. Clint looked down for a moment, then back at her with that penetrating stare that had intimidated Hollywood executives for decades. Or maybe it just holds up a mirror, he said quietly. For a second, Jessica didn't have a comeback. The simplicity of his response had caught her off guard, forcing her to consider whether her criticism was about his films or about what those films revealed about America itself. The studio fell into an electric silence. No one was shouting, no one was interrupting, but the tension was palpable. The cameras captured every micro-expression, every pause, every moment of this unexpected philosophical battle playing out on live television. Everyone watching knew this wasn't over. Not even close. After the commercial break, the atmosphere in the studio had shifted from surprised curiosity to focused intensity. Jessica Tarlov sat straighter in her chair, her pen tapping lightly against her notes. Across from her, Clint hadn't moved much, but his presence seemed to fill the entire set. Dana Perino attempted to guide the conversation into safer waters. Clint, when you made films like Gran Torino or Unforgiven, did you expect them to become political lightning rods? Clint took a measured breath before responding. No, I expected them to make people uncomfortable. That's the point of storytelling. It's not supposed to soothe everyone. Jessica jumped in immediately, sensing an opening. But that discomfort often aligns with a particular ideology. Conservative, male, defensive, guns solve the problem when the law fails, and your characters step in with violence while viewers cheer. There it was again, that word, violence, delivered like an accusation. But Clint didn't get rattled. He simply looked at her with the same calm intensity and replied, "And yet, I've never made a film where violence doesn't come with a cost." The line landed with devastating precision. Even Greg Gutfeld stopped mid-gesture, recognizing the power of the response. Jessica hesitated for just a moment, but quickly regrouped. "That cost is often buried under applause," she countered. "Do you really believe people walk away thinking deeply, or do they just remember the shootout?" Clint looked toward the camera, not into it, but just past it, as if addressing the millions watching at home. "You don't get to control how people interpret your work. You just make it honest. And if it's honest, it sticks with them long after the gunfire." The studio fell into complete silence, except for the low hum of the lights. Jesse Waters finally broke the tension. "But isn't this exactly what we need? A debate about what art is for." Jessica's response was immediate and sharp. "I think we're at a point where we have to be more critical. We have to ask what we're normalizing, especially when the people creating that art have a massive platform." Clint didn't miss a beat. "And we also have to ask what we're afraid of. Are we afraid of complex characters, flawed men, or are we just uncomfortable because the world isn't as clean as the narratives we want?" That line hit Jessica like a physical blow, not because it was harsh, but because it carried the weight of conviction rather than deflection. For a moment, you could see it land, the uncomfortable realization that perhaps her criticism revealed as much about her fears as it did about his films. The confrontation reached its crescendo when Jessica Tarlov made a decision that would define the entire segment. Without warning or dramatic buildup, she simply stood up from her chair, her movement so sudden and deliberate that it seemed to freeze everyone else in place. "You know what bothers me most?" she said, her voice low but unmistakably sharp. "It's not just the films, it's the silence that follows. You stir something up in people and then disappear behind the excuse of art. Meanwhile, others, women, minorities, people outside your Hollywood bubble, are left cleaning up the reaction." Clint didn't look away or show any sign of being rattled. "You assume reaction is my responsibility," he replied calmly. "But maybe the audience deserves more credit. Maybe they're not as fragile as you think." Jessica shook her head, her frustration now visible to millions of viewers. "That's not credit. That's negligence." Greg Gutfeld tried desperately to intervene. "All right, let's just—" But Jessica wasn't finished. "No, let's actually say it," she continued, her words coming faster now, more urgent. "You've made a career building mythologies around stoic men with guns, and that mythology has consequences. It teaches people that empathy is weakness, that complexity is noise, that strength means shutting down emotion and shooting your way out." She wasn't shouting. She didn't need to. Her words carried the force of years of built-up frustration with a cultural narrative she saw as fundamentally harmful. Clint sat perfectly still, observing her the way a master craftsman might examine a piece of work before making the final adjustment. Then, with devastating calm, he said, "And yet here you are, full of emotion, commanding the room. No gun, no badge, just words. You have the platform. You have the power. Maybe the old myth is already broken." That's when Jessica made her decision. She stood up, not in anger, not in defeat, but with the controlled determination of someone who had suddenly understood something important about the conversation they were having. "I came here thinking I could have a real discussion," she said, gathering her notes with deliberate precision. "But what I got was another lecture on how I'm supposed to understand men like the ones in your movies. I'm tired of being told to sit with the discomfort of violence, but no one ever sits with mine." And with that declaration, Jessica Tarlov walked off the set of The Five, leaving behind a stunned panel and millions of viewers who had just witnessed something unprecedented in live television. The immediate aftermath of Jessica's walk-off left the Fox News studio in unprecedented chaos. Greg Gutfeld, Dana Perino, and Jesse Waters sat in stunned silence, unsure how to proceed with nearly 15 minutes of live television remaining. The audience at home watched in fascination as one of cable news's most controlled environments suddenly felt completely unpredictable. Clint Eastwood, meanwhile, remained exactly where he had been throughout the entire confrontation, seated calmly, hands folded, expression unchanged. He didn't gloat, didn't celebrate, didn't even acknowledge that anything unusual had occurred. He simply waited as if he had expected this outcome all along. Greg finally found his voice. "Well, that was unexpected." Clint's response was characteristically measured. "I see someone who came to speak their truth, and I see a culture that forgot how to listen unless it agrees." The remaining segment continued with a different energy entirely. Without Jessica's combative presence, the conversation shifted from confrontation to reflection. Dana asked thoughtful questions about the role of art in society. Jesse explored the responsibility of artists versus the interpretation of audiences. Even Greg, known for his humor, seemed to understand they were witnessing something significant. But the real story was happening outside the studio. Within minutes of Jessica's exit, social media exploded. The hashtag #Jessica Walks Off began trending nationwide, followed quickly by #Clint Eastwood and #The Five. Clips of the exchange were uploaded, shared, and dissected by millions of viewers who couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. The reactions were predictably divided. Progressive voices praised Jessica for refusing to legitimize what they saw as outdated and harmful cultural narratives. Conservative commentators celebrated Clint's unflappable response to what they characterized as liberal intolerance. But something unexpected happened in the hours and days that followed. Instead of the usual tribal warfare that dominates social media, a different kind of conversation began to emerge. Thoughtful analyses appeared from cultural critics, film scholars, and social commentators who saw the exchange as something more complex than a simple political confrontation. Jessica, meanwhile, had retreated to her dressing room, where she sat quietly processing what had just occurred. Her phone buzzed constantly with supportive messages from allies and angry responses from critics, but she ignored them all. Instead, she found herself replaying Clint's words. "Maybe you need to look harder at what you're afraid to see." The line had stuck with her, not because she agreed with it, but because it had forced her to confront an uncomfortable question about her own motivations and fears. What happened next surprised everyone, including Jessica Tarlov herself. Instead of issuing the standard social media statement or booking defensive appearances on friendly shows, she did something unprecedented in the current media landscape. She took time to think. 2 days after the confrontation, Jessica published a thoughtful essay titled, "What We Don't Say When the Cameras Are Rolling." The piece wasn't a retraction or an apology. It was something far more valuable, a genuine reflection on the nature of cultural dialogue in a polarized era. In the essay, Jessica acknowledged that her walk-off hadn't been a retreat, but a reset, a recognition that the format of television debate often prevents the kind of nuanced discussion that complex cultural issues require. She admitted she was still troubled by what she saw as the dangerous mythology in Clint's films, but she also acknowledged his point about audience responsibility and the complexity of artistic interpretation. Most surprisingly, she sent the essay to Clint before publication. His response came within hours, a single-line email that read, "I read it twice. Thank you for writing it." The exchange, private though it was, somehow leaked to entertainment media and added another layer to the story. Here were two people who had clashed dramatically on live television, yet had found a way to continue their dialogue with mutual respect. The essay went viral, not because of outrage or controversy, but because of its rarity. A public figure actually engaging with criticism and complexity rather than simply defending their position. Educators began using both the original TV segment and Jessica's follow-up essay as teaching tools for courses on media literacy, cultural criticism, and civil discourse. Clint, true to his nature, never publicly commented on the essay beyond that private email. But those close to him noted that he seemed pleased by the response, not because he had won the confrontation, but because it had sparked exactly the kind of deeper thinking he had always hoped his films might inspire. The five continued without ever directly addressing the incident again, but something had changed. The show's discussions became more thoughtful, more willing to sit with complexity rather than rushing to conclusions. Other cable news programs began experimenting with longer-form discussions and follow-up segments that allowed for more nuanced exploration of difficult topics. The Clint Eastwood versus Jessica Tarlov confrontation became a cultural touchstone, not as an example of political division, but as proof that even the most heated disagreements could evolve into something more constructive when approached with honesty and mutual respect. Sometimes the most powerful moments on television aren't the ones that end with a clear winner, but the ones that leave everyone thinking long after the cameras stop rolling. What did you think of this legendary TV moment? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
Don't forget to hit the like button if you like the video and subscribe if you want videos like this to come. See you in the next story.